The pie box was warm in my hands, tucked beneath one arm, while the gift bags looped over the other. I adjusted the scarf around my neck as snow fell in soft, silent flurries, dotting my coat sleeves and catching in my hair. The porch lights hadn't changed, still the same white bulbs my late husband Riggs installed 20 years ago. I stepped up carefully, my boots crunching softly against the salted steps. I stood still for a second, just breathing. Through the frosted glass panels on the front door, I could see the faint outlines of people passing by, figures in motion, voices rising in laughter. For a moment, I imagined it might be Gavin opening the door, or even one of the grandkids I hadn't seen since Easter 3 years ago. But when the knob turned and the door swung open, it was Bryn. Her blonde hair was curled in glossy waves, her lipstick an expensive plum I'd never seen on her before. She wore emerald velvet, fitted, high-collared, polished. Her eyes met mine, and in an instant, all warmth dropped from her face like a pulled curtain. She gave a tight sigh through her nose, then said flatly, "This is a private dinner. We don't want you here." I blinked. Behind her, I saw the dining room filled. A long table dressed in ivory linen, gold-rimmed plates, candles flickering. The smell of rosemary and baked ham drifted out in a warm wave. Odessa sat at the head, smiling, as she poured wine for a woman I didn't recognize. Preston's brothers were there, their wives. Children I didn't know by name. My chair, the one with the embroidered cushion I had hand-stitched after my husband's stroke, was gone. My voice, when it came, was quieter than I intended. "Got it." Bryn didn't move, didn't soften. She waited. I turned away. The snow had started to stick as I stepped off the porch pie and gifts still in hand. The house behind me hummed with voices that no longer included mine. My boots left a trail in the untouched white. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the car and slid into the driver's seat, my fingers were trembling. I didn't turn the key in the ignition right away. I just sat there, hands trembling in my lap, the pie box resting gently against the passenger seat. The windows began to fog, tracing ghost-like spirals across the glass as my breath came in uneven waves. Inside the house, their laughter was still faintly audible, dulled by distance and insult. That table. I couldn't get it out of my mind. The long oak table glowing beneath the overhead chandelier dressed in gold and ivory now, but I remembered when it was raw, unfinished wood. Riggs and I had spent 2 weekends sanding it in our garage. He'd joked that the table would outlast us both. It almost had. When Bryn got engaged, she mentioned wanting a rustic piece for her new home. I had offered it immediately. She'd looked surprised, but pleased. I told her it would be our blessing to her new life. I didn't say it, but I had hoped it would help tie her back to something real. Something of us. But somewhere between her wedding registry and her wedding planner, something shifted in her. The first time I heard her call me quaint in front of Preston's mother, my stomach turned. She meant it as a compliment, she said later, but I heard what she didn't say. Preston came from money, old polished lacquered wealth. He was polite, but there was always a sense that I embarrassed him, a retired hospice nurse with calloused hands and unpolished shoes. And Bryn, she started adapting. Little things at first. A voice change. Comments about my casseroles being too heavy. Then holidays with the Morvans instead of us. And now strangers seated at my table. I reached into my purse and slid out a slim manila envelope. The corner was creased from travel, but the contents were intact. A copy of the deed, notarized, still valid. Bryn never knew I hadn't signed over full ownership. I never told her that the house she lived in still had my name stitched quietly into its bones. The knock on my window was so sudden, I jumped. Then I heard his voice, ragged, urgent. "Mom, Mom." Gavin's voice cracked through the quiet, like ice splitting underfoot. He rushed toward the car, no coat, his dress shirt clinging to his frame in the wind. I lowered the window just as he reached it, breath pluming into the cold air. "I was sitting there waiting for you," he panted. "Bryn said you were running late." I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. His eyes darted over my face, then to the untouched pie beside me. "She didn't let you in." "She opened the door," I said, softly, wiping beneath my nose with the back of my hand. That was the extent of it. Gavin stepped back and let out a word I hadn't heard from his mouth since he was a teenager. Then he kicked the snow once hard. "I'm going back in there," he growled. "No," I said quickly. "Please don't. She's already made her choice. And I won't be the reason your holiday implodes." "You were supposed to sit next to me," he said again. Quieter this time. I told him. "I saved you a seat." I looked away. "Let's not turn this into a war. It already is. You taught us love. She learned image. From them." He pulled open the car door. "Come on. Let's get out of here. Somewhere warm." We ended up in a 24-hour diner off the highway, half empty, but filled with enough noise to let us think without speaking. We both ordered coffee. I couldn't finish mine. "You should stay in town," Gavin said finally. "At least for a few nights. You're not driving back tonight, are you?" I shook my head. "I booked a hotel, just in case." He looked like he wanted to say more. So I reached into my bag and slid the manila folder across the table. He opened it slowly, eyes narrowing as he flipped through the pages. Then his eyebrows shot up. "You still have controlling interest in the house." I nodded once. "And this clause, what is this?" I met his eyes, steady this time. "Let's just say, Bryn forgot who gave her that home." The next evening, while Gavin and I nursed bowls of chili, in the warmth of the lodge cafe, the Morvan household plunged into darkness. It wasn't a dramatic storm or downed line. It was a shutoff, quiet and surgical. I hadn't intended for it to be so soon, but apparently, when legal notices are hand-delivered and reviewed utility access becomes a formality. Preston was carving lamb when it happened. Odessa was mid-toast about curated family traditions when the lights went out and the stereo stuttered to silence. Bryn, I'm told, stood still, frozen, trying to maintain her expression. And then came the envelope, left neatly at the foot of the front door, my attorney's letterhead addressed to Bryn and Preston, jointly. Not a threat, just a formal notice that the property transfer was under review pending ownership clarification. Bryn opened it in front of everyone. No one spoke. Preston's face went pale. Odessa rose from her chair like a hawk startled from a perch. "You let her keep control," she hissed. Bryn didn't answer, just stared into her wine glass like it held the explanation. Later, Gavin described her retreat into the hallway. Quiet, measured steps, jaw clenched. A woman unraveling without letting a single thread show. He said she looked like a child scolded in front of guests. And in some ways, that's exactly what she was. I knew how tightly Odessa had her coiled. For years, that woman had whispered half-truths into Bryn's ear. That kindness was weakness. That my frugal ways were rooted in shame. That if Bryn wanted to be taken seriously, she had to shed her past like dead skin. She means well, Bryn once said, when I bristled at how Odessa dismissed my baking at a baby shower. No, she meant control. And Bryn swallowed it. When I handed over the deed years ago, I left a clause buried deep in the paperwork, a contingency for reassessment, if I was ever formally excluded from the property. Just in case. Just like this. And now the lights were off and the table was full, but the foundation had shifted beneath every polished chair. The room at the lodge smelled faintly of cedar and orange peels. Modest, but clean. A gas fireplace hummed softly in the corner, and outside, snow gathered in a thick hush over the parking lot. Gavin showed up the next morning, with his wife Mel and little Delia, bundled in 3 layers of pink. They brought coffee, a box of cookies from the local bakery, and a string of lights Mel found in the trunk of their car. Gavin plugged them into the wall, and we draped them around the small round table in the center of the room. Delia called it our tree table and insisted we stack the presents underneath, even if most were just wrapped leftovers and re-gifted chocolates. We ate turkey sandwiches and drank cider from mugs too big for Delia's hands. Gavin leaned back in the armchair, a paper crown from a cracker perched askew on his head. "This feels more like Christmas than that mansion ever did," he said quietly. I smiled, but there was a weight behind it. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I laughed with my son like this. We used to do this every year, silly paper hats, mismatched dishes, more warmth than perfection. Later, when Delia napped, curled between pillows, and Mel read by the window, Gavin and I sat together and remembered Bryn when she was 5, how she used to sleep with the angel tree topper clutched like a doll, how she insisted every Christmas song be sung with a British accent because she thought Santa was from London. She was so light, I said, before she started trying to be perfect. Gavin nodded. She still could be. Maybe. That night, back in the quiet of my room, my phone buzzed. A group text. Bryn had finally responded. "You didn't need to cause a scene." I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I typed my reply and hit send. I didn't. I just left. I set the phone down, turned off the light, and listened to the stillness wrap around me like a blanket. It was just past noon when Gavin knocked on my door, his jaw tight. Behind him stood Preston, arms crossed, dressed far too formally for anything but a confrontation. "She needs to fix this," Preston said. His voice clipped. "Before my mother takes legal steps." Gavin didn't flinch. "Then maybe your mother should ask why the legal steps were necessary." Preston muttered something under his breath about families airing grievances like it's a courtroom before storming off snow crunching under his shoes. "We need to talk," Gavin said, his tone gentler now. "Not with Odessa. Just us. I told Bryn to come." I blinked. "You invited her?" He nodded. "She said she'd think about it." Less than an hour later, she was there. Bryn stood stiffly just inside the door, arms folded. No makeup this time. Hair pulled into a quick ponytail. Even her boots looked scuffed. "You came all this way just to prove something?" she asked. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman who turned me away at the door, but the girl who once begged me to braid her hair like the characters in her storybooks. "No," I said gently. "I came because your brother said someone might still want me there." She didn't respond. Just sat on the edge of the couch like the cushions might swallow her whole. For a while, no one spoke. Gavin left the room, letting the silence stretch. Finally, Bryn cleared her throat. "You embarrassed me." "I know I said, but I didn't plan to. I planned to bring pie and gifts and sit where you said I could." Her eyes flicked toward the window, jaw tight. "You never fight back." "Not really. And then you do it all at once." "I didn't fight you," I said. "I protected myself." Another pause. Then she sighed. "I don't know how we got here." "We stopped talking," I said, "and we both let other people speak for us." Bryn looked down at her hands. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. "There's more to this than you think." Bryn twisted a tissue in her lap, eyes darting anywhere but at me. Then, all at once, the words tumbled out. "You always looked at Gavin with softness," she said, voice tight. "You gave him second chances, gentle words. I had to be the strong one. You expected me to just cope." I let her finish. Let her sit in it. Then I said quietly, "I thought you didn't need the softness. You always walked like you knew where you were going." Gavin stumbled more. "I didn't mean it as favoritism. I just thought. You didn't need me the same way." She sniffled and shook her head. "But I did. And when I didn't get it, I tried to earn it other ways, being impressive, being perfect. especially after I met Preston. His family made me feel like if I wasn't extraordinary, I was disposable. I moved to the edge of the armchair close enough to see how fragile she looked beneath the defenses. You're not disposable, Bryn. You never were. Her mouth quivered before she pressed her lips together. Sometimes I feel like I got lost in their world, like I traded being your daughter for being a Morven. Gavin returned just then carrying mugs of tea and set one down in front of each of us. He sat cross-legged on the rug and looked between us. We were both just kids trying to earn love, he said, and maybe we didn't realize it looked different for each of us. Bryn wiped her face with the back of her hand, then laughed softly. Well, I certainly didn't expect to cry over that today. He smiled. You and me both. We sat there in silence for a moment, and then Bryn reached out and touched Gavin's shoulder. It wasn't a grand gesture, but he leaned into it just enough. A small, awkward hug, real and unscripted. I watched them, my children, not as they had been or who they'd become, but as they were in that moment, two people trying. I set down my tea. There's still something you both need to hear. The knock came sharp and fast, 3 precise raps. Gavin opened the door before I could even rise. Odessa stood there, wrapped in a camel coat, makeup, flawless heels impractical for snow. She didn't wait for an invitation. I assume you're enjoying this, she said, brushing past Gavin like he was furniture, upending everything just to make a point. I stayed seated. I didn't come here to upend anything. I came because I was told I was still part of this family. You gave that house to Bryn, she snapped. You can't just take it back when your feelings get hurt. I folded my hands. Legally, I never gave it away. I preserved it because I knew one day she might forget where she came from. Odessa narrowed her eyes. That's rich. You were never more than a sentimental caretaker. You don't understand what legacy means. Gavin stepped forward, tone low but steady. She understands it better than you ever will. Odessa turned to him with that familiar look, pity pretending to be civility. Gavin, dear, you don't have to get involved. I already am, he said. You had your say for years. Now it's Mom's turn. She looked back at me, eyebrows high, as if waiting for me to crumble under the weight of her disapproval. This isn't about property anymore, I said. It's about space. Emotional space. And I've claimed mine back. Odessa opened her mouth, then closed it. Her gaze flicked to Bryn, who stood behind the kitchen counter, arms crossed. Face unreadable. Well, Odessa said, pulling her coat tighter. Don't expect sympathy when the family falls apart. I rose, walked her to the door, and opened it for her. Don't worry, I said. I'm not looking for sympathy. Just honesty. She didn't reply. She clicked down the steps and into the snow, disappearing as quickly as she'd arrived. I turned to Bryn. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. But she hadn't followed Odessa either. Instead, she turned her eyes back to mine and nodded, once barely perceptible, but enough to make something in my chest settle. The knock the next morning was softer, more hesitant. I opened the door to find Bryn standing there, no coat this time, cheeks pink from the cold. Beside her, little Ivy clutched something folded in both hands. I hope we're not too early, Bryn said. I stepped aside and nodded. Ivy marched in with the seriousness of a soldier and held out the paper to me. It's for you, she said. I unfolded it slowly. Crayon lines danced across the page, a big rectangle with circles around it. A table. Stick figures with smiling faces. One labeled Grandma. A red heart floated above my head. Grandma's table, Ivy explained, pointing. That's where you sit. I held the drawing against my chest for a moment, then knelt down to kiss her forehead. It's perfect. Bryn hovered nearby, watching, unsure. She drew that last night after we got home, she said. Said your table was prettier than ours. I smiled, faintly, standing. She's got a good eye. Bryn's face tightened, then relaxed again. I'm sorry. Not just for yesterday. For everything. I waited. She took a breath. You were right. About the house. About how I let other people let myself decide who belongs where. But I don't want you to stay in a lodge or leave town like a stranger. I want you to come back to the house. Not as a guest, as family, as someone whose name is on the wall. And always was. Ivy had climbed into the armchair and was humming to herself, rocking gently, as if unaware of the weight hanging between us. I looked at Bryn. She wasn't polished. She wasn't perfect. She looked tired and real. And finally, she looked like my daughter again. I nodded. All right. She let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. There's a room ready. Ivy insisted on putting fresh sheets on the bed herself. She said it had to smell like cinnamon. Ivy beamed. I sprayed the pillows. Then how could I say no? I said, smiling, and began gathering my things as she reached for my coat. The porch was exactly as I remembered it. White lights twinkling, the nativity set in its usual spot. Snow gathered in soft drifts along the railing. I held the pie carefully with one hand and reached for the doorbell with the other. Before my finger could press it, the door flew open. "Grandma's here." Ivy shouted, arms outstretched like she was announcing royalty. She barreled into me for a hug, nearly toppling the pie. Bryn appeared behind her, laughing. "Sorry. She's been watching the driveway since noon." I stepped inside, the warmth and scent of cinnamon wrapping around me like a blanket. The dining table had been reset, white linen, gold-trimmed china, and right there at the end, my chair. The same embroidered cushion I had made so long ago rested on it like it had never been gone. Bryn helped me out of my coat and handed me a folded recipe card. "I found this in your handwriting. The apple pie," she said softly. "Will you teach me the way you used to?" I held the card a moment, thumb tracing the faded ink. Of course. The photo wall had changed. Nestled among school portraits and wedding pictures were new frames, me with Gavin and Mel at the Seattle pier, Ivy riding my shoulders last spring, Bryn and I sitting on the back porch with mugs of cocoa, and baby Thomas asleep between us. "I wanted you to see this," Bryn said, as she pointed out one last frame. It was the drawing Ivy had made, the one of Grandma's table now professionally matted and centered beneath the word home. Ivy tugged at my hand and placed something in my palm. A small ornament, handmade, a red felt heart with white stitching across the center. "I made it at school," she said proudly. "It says home." I walked over and hung it gently on the tree. Bryn stood beside me. "Took us a while, didn't it?" I looked around at the glowing lights, the familiar faces, the chair that had waited. "Worth every step," I said. Then I took my seat at the table.